Using your smart speaker for this, okay, I've added cheese to your shopping list. Yeah, that's pretty smart. But shopping online with SuperValue? That's even smarter. Have the best produce hand-picked and delivered straight to your door. Download the SuperValue app now or shop online at supervalue.ie.
Onto your headphones and pour your favorite beverage. It's time for the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Now, fresh off the sidelines, your host, Matt McPeak.
Fantasy freaks and geeks, what is up? Welcome to the NFC WEST offseason recap 2020 season preview. This is the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. I am the host, Matt McPeak. Thank you very much for tuning in. Let's jump right into this. We got the NFC West defending champions, San Francisco 49ers. They were 13-3, 5-1 in the division. The 49ers made it all the way to the Super Bowl last year. The defense was second in fewest passing yards per game. They allowed the second fewest total yards per game. They were fourth in takeaways per game. They had one of the best defensive lines in football. They were third in team sacks per game. They had 3 defensive linemen all finish with double-digit sacks. Nick Bosa with 13, Eric Armstead with 12, and DeForest Buckner with 10. Plus, D Ford had 7.5 as well. So this defensive line was getting after people. They gave up the 7th fewest rushing touchdowns and the 4th fewest completions. They had the 5th most tackles for loss. They were just all around a great defense. You mix that with a top 3 rushing attack, and boom, you've got yourself a Super Bowl contender. Any team that is able to run the ball and play defense, they can get to the playoffs, and if you can get to the playoffs, anything can happen. So we saw the first full year with Jimmy Garoppolo last season. He finished as the number 14 QB in fantasy. It's tough breaking that top 12 of quarterbacks when you're on a team that is built around playing defense and running the ball, like I just mentioned. But the 49ers were one of 3 teams to run the ball more than pass it. They had 3 different running backs get over 120 carries, 3 different backs score 5 touchdowns or more. Not including the playoffs, they had 6 games with over 150 team rushing yards. They had 2 games with over 230 team rushing yards. So they really put it on teams with their great offensive line and a head coach and play caller that always gets a lot out of his running game. Kyle Shanahan, he gets a lot of hype as being one of these young offensive minds, and you would think, he must love to pass the ball. But you look at him, you look at Sean McVay too. They're going to run the ball when they can. So it's kind of cool seeing that swing back. These younger coaches, realizing the fact that they're still playing football. It seems like they found a solid number 1 wide receiver in Deebo Samuels. He led all 49ers in all 49er receivers in targets, receptions, and yards. He was second on the team in all those stats behind only the amazing George Kittle. The 49ers could be building quite a group of wide receivers here. Last year, they drafted Deebo and Jalen Hurd, who missed his entire rookie year with a stress fracture in his back. 2018, they drafted Dante Pettis, who caught 5 touchdowns his rookie year, and Richie James, the team's primary returner. But he also caught 2 touchdowns on only 14 catches. So when he's involved, they seem to draw up plays just for him. They like to attack certain matchups with this guy. So very diverse wide receiver core. They have a lot of young talent at wide receiver. Unfortunately, Deebo is hurt, and he'll probably miss at least 4 weeks of 2020. But will be good to see if his fellow classmate Jalen Hurd can get a shot and show us what he can do. And Brandon Ayuk will get the same opportunity that Debo had last year. Brandon Ayuk being the rookie. He was just drafted in 2020 in the first round. So the 49ers could really be building something special here with all these young wide receivers. It's going to be very interesting to see what Jalen Hurd ends up being, because if they hit on Hurd and Ayuk and Debo, they're going to have a solid 3 wide receivers to go with George Kittle for years to come. So speaking of George Kittle, he finished in the top 3 for the second year in a row in 2019. He's only been in the league now for 3 years, and he's already got 2 top 3 finishes. He was second among tight ends in half PPR last year. He was one of 4 tight ends with over 100 targets and one of only 3 tight ends with 1,000+ receiving yards, and he only played in 14 games. So I'm willing to bet that if he played in all 16, he might have beat out Travis Kelce for that number 1 spot. With Debo slated to miss the beginning of the season, I think Kittle will take over as the number 1 tight end in football, but by the end of the season, he's not just a great receiving tight end. He's just as good blocking in the run game. So you go back and you watch the Super Bowl, Kittle he had a key block on almost every single big running play. And we talk about it all the time with tight ends. You have to be on the field in order to be targeted, and you have to be targeted in order to catch the ball, obviously. So this dude does not come off the field on a team that loves to run the ball so much. They look at him as a 6th offensive line. It just so happens that he also happens to be one of the top 3 pass-catching tight ends as well. So he's going to be on the field. He should see plenty of targets. He should have no problem hitting that 100-target mark again this year. I'm all about George Kittle. I love these tight ends that you don't have to worry about. You don't have to stream. You don't have to go week to week. You just keep the dude in your lineup all year long, and you know you're going to get at least 6-7 games where he's going to put out twice, 3 times more than the average tight end does. So I'm all for George Kittle. I'm sure you've heard of this Super Bowl hangover, the idea that teams struggle the year after they lose the Super Bowl. But if you look at the last 3 Super Bowl losers, they finished a combined 30-18 in the following season. That's the Falcons in 2017, finished 10-6 with an NFC South title. The 2018 Patriots, who went 11-5 and actually won the Super Bowl following their most recent Super Bowl loss to the Eagles, and the 9-7 Rams last year, who were definitely not the same team as the year before, but still a very good team. So I don't think the 49ers are really going to fall into mediocrity or finish with an 8-8 or 9-7 season. I think they will again be one of the best teams in the league. I think 10-6 is easily attainable for them, if not 11-5, maybe even 12 wins. It all depends on how competitive that NFC West is going to end up. As far as free agency goes, the defensive line took a pretty big hit with Sheldon Day, Kerry Hayter, and Anthony Zidell all heading to new teams, but they re-signed Eric Armstead, they re-signed center Ben Garland, and safety Jimmy Ward. They also traded defensive lineman DeForest Buckner to the Colts for a first-round pick. All 5 of the 49ers picks in the 2020 draft were acquired through trade, whether that was moving up or trading players away for picks. The pick they got from the Colts for DeForest Buckner was used to take defensive tackle Javon Kinlaw from South Carolina at 14th overall. Then they traded up to get to the 25th overall spot to take Brandon Ayuk, wide receiver from Arizona State. Their next pick wasn't until the 5th round when they used the pick that they got for trading away Matt Breida on tackle Colton McKevitz from West Virginia. In the 6th and 7th round, they took a tight end and another wide receiver, Charlie Warner and Juwan Jennings. So we'll see if those guys can help out in 2020. We'll see if they can even make the team. All right, their key schedule run for the defending NFC champion San Francisco 49ers. We got Week 6. They're at home against the Rams. Week 7, they're at the Patriots. Week 8, they're at the Seahawks. So That's 3 straight weeks of going West Coast, East Coast, West Coast. Week 9, they're at the Packers. Week 10, they are at the Saints. Then they get their bye before they play at the Rams Week 11, and then they're at home against the Bills in Week 12. So couple AFC East teams sprinkled into there with all those NFC West opponents, plus you got the Packers. So should be an interesting year for the 49ers here. Next, we got the Seattle Seahawks. They finished 11-5. They were 3-3 in the division. 2019 was the 7th double-digit winning season for Russell Wilson at quarterback. It was the 10th season under Pete Carroll with the 8th playoff appearance. So out of Carroll's 10 years, he's only missed the playoffs twice. It's pretty awesome. They won in the first round at Philadelphia despite having a better record than the NFC East champions. One of those things that I think the NFL must change. It doesn't make any sense for a wildcard team that finished 11-5 have to go play on the road against a division winner that only won 8 or 9 games. It's stupid. It happens every year. Get rid of it. The Seahawks had the chance to win the NFC West in Week 17 against the 49ers, but they came up 1 yard short on a Jacob Hollister reception on the 1 yard line. Dre Greenlaw made a tackle by ending up being the difference maker for the 49ers. That tackle pretty much gave them home field advantage throughout the playoffs. In the game against the Eagles, Jadeveon Clowney knocked out Carson Wentz. Forced Josh McCown to come in and play the rest of the game in relief. McCown was obviously past his prime. He's a dog though, man. I mean, as a Jet fan, he was on the team for 2 years, and you could tell he was giving it everything he got. Man, he's not one of those just old dudes sitting around collecting paychecks. And then even after this Eagles loss, he was pretty emotional in the press conference. You could tell, he really does care about this stuff. So he tore his hamstring in that game, but played through it, still completed 75% of his passes, and actually ran for 23 yards, but he was sacked 6 times. In the divisional round against the Packers, Russell Wilson had to carry the team on his back like he always has, like he always does, leading the Seahawks in rushing with 64 yards while also throwing for 277 yards on only 21 completions. The Seahawks had to rely on Travis Homer and Marshawn Lynch as at their running back positions during the playoffs after Rashad Penny and Chris Carson both went down with injuries late in the year. Homer and Marshawn racked up a whopping 125 total yards between the two of them over the 2 playoff games. The Eagles were one of the toughest run defenses in the league in 2019, but the Packers were not. They gave up the 9th most fantasy points to running backs. The Seahawks were a run-first team all year and pretty much have been throughout the entire Pete Carroll, Russell Wilson era, but they just didn't have the backs to run the ball effectively in the playoffs against that Packers team, which explains why the Packers were able to advance and the Seahawks went home packing. Rookie DK Metcalf showed to be a legit prospect. He finished as the number 32 wide receiver in half PPR, only caught 58% of his targets, of his 100 targets, but he had 900 yards and 7 touchdowns. His fellow 2019 rookie wide receivers, A.J. Brown, Terry McLaurin, and Deebo Samuels all finished ahead of him in fantasy, but I would argue that DK is in the best position of these 2019 rookies heading into 2020. Marquise Brown is also in that group, but the Ravens are one of the most run-heavy teams in the league as well. They added 2 more wide receivers in this year's draft, so the Seahawks also ran the ball a lot last year, but there is chatter that at the end of the season, at least, that Russell Wilson wants to throw the ball more in 2020, and they might have to, with Rashad Penny most likely to start the year on PUP with that knee injury, and with Chris Carson coming off of a hip injury. I think we see the Seahawks get a little more creative with DK in year 2. I think we see him get 125 to 150 targets easily. I see him leading the team there. I think he gets the majority of the red zone targets, and I think we see him take a big step forward. The Seahawks still have Tyler Lockett, who is proving to be one of the most consistent players in football, 3 straight top 15 finishes in fantasy, but DK is the quintessential wide receiver 1, right? He's got the size, the strength, the speed to do anything you want with him as far as play calling goes. So I'm looking for DK to take that step forward in 2020. Seattle signed Carlos Hyde to give themselves some depth, help take some of that load off of Chris Carson to start the season. They also signed Philip Dorsett from New England to fill that wide receiver 3 spot. They let Jerome Brown and Malik Turner walk. The Seahawks had some injuries at the tight end position throughout the year. First, Will Dissly tore up his knee midway through the season. Jacob Hollister had a few little minor injuries here and there. So the Seahawks signed veteran Greg Olsen. They also brought in a few offensive linemen and are possibly in talks with Josh Gordon or Antonio Brown as far as bringing in another veteran wide receiver. I think Greg Olsen's going to be great for this team. Russell Wilson has always shown a propensity to have a connection with those tight ends. We saw Will Dissly kind of come out of nowhere last year, score a bunch of touchdowns, and then Jacob Hollister, who was a practice squad guy, I think he ended up coming in and making a bunch of plays as well. So Russell Wilson has shown that if you're a tight end and you can get open, he can get you the football. So Greg Olsen still has it in him. I don't think he's running away from anybody, but we saw last year with Jason Witten, these older tight ends, man, all they need is the body position. And after a decade of playing in the NFL, I think this dude knows how to do that. So you're going to see him just running up the seam, posting up linebackers and catching high balls. So should be fun. They had a pretty fruitful draft. They made 8 picks total. The Seahawks are getting a little long in the tooth at linebacker with KJ Wright and Bobby Wagner. So I guess they felt they needed to get younger there, and they used their first-round pick on linebacker Jordan Brooks. In the second round, they took an edge rusher, Darrell Taylor from Tennessee. They've tried to re-sign Jadeveon Clowney, but he wants way too much money. In the third round, they got the guard from LSU, Damian Lewis. The fourth round, they made 2 picks, Colby Parkinson, tight end from Stanford, and DJ Dallas, running back from Miami. Stanford is kind of becoming quite the producer of NFL tight end talent. You look at Zach Ertz, Colby Fleener, Austin Hooper, Levine Toilolu, some of the Stanford tight ends playing in the league right now. Stanford has had the most tight ends selected in the draft over the last decade with 7 of them. So this guy should come in and I think he's going to be just fine. I think he's going to be great. In the 5th round, they took another edge player, defensive end from Syracuse, Alton Robinson. And then in the 6th round, they took a wide receiver. And in the 7th, another tight end. So looking at their key schedule run coming out of the bye in week 8. Excuse me. Coming out of the bye in week 7. They're at the Cardinals. Week 8, they're at home against the 49ers. Week 9, they're at the Bills. Week 10, at the Rams. Week 11, they're at home against the Cardinals. And then week 12, they're at the Eagles. So what's that? 1, 2, 3, 4 division games in the span of 6 games coming out of their bye. So we'll see what the Seattle Seahawks look like heading into 2020. Los Angeles Rams finished 9-7. They were 3-3 in the division. The Rams were not the same team in 2019 that they were in 2018 when they went to the Super Bowl but lost to the Patriots. Todd Gurley went from 5.81 yards per touch in 2018 to 4.18 yards per touch in 2019. He had about 60 less touches in 2019 compared to 2018, despite playing in one more game last year. The knee injury that limited him in the Super Bowl definitely kept him from being the player that we saw in his first 4 years. As a result, the Rams offense as a whole took a step back. Sean McVay's offense is very much dependent on the play action and misdirection, you know, those jet sweeps and all those weird pre-play movements. And with Gurley not able to stretch the defense horizontally, the Rams went from 2nd in points per game to 10th, and they went from 3rd in rushing yards per game to 26th. That drop-off from 2nd to 10th in scoring is pretty significant, but to drop 23 spots in rushing is huge. With the running game not the same, the Rams were forced to change the offense a bit. The biggest change came in the usage of tight ends. In 2018, Tyler Higbee and Gerald Everett combined for 84 targets. In 2019, 149 targets, almost twice as much. Higbee had a huge second half of the season. He went from 27 targets in his first 8 games to 62 targets in his last 6 games. Sean McVay has said during the offseason that he needs to continue to keep the tight ends involved in his game plans. The team traded away Brandon Cooks to the Texans, so Josh Reynolds has a really good shot to take that wide receiver 3 spot in Los Angeles. All he's got to compete with is really 5 undrafted free agents and the rookie Van Jefferson, who we'll get to in a minute. He may seem like the replacement of Brandon Cooks with his similar 40-yard time. But he's 3 inches taller and about 20 pounds heavier than Brandon Cooks. But Jefferson's route running kind of profiles more as a slot receiver, so we'll talk about him in a minute. Free agency, the Rams lost a pair of linebackers with Dante Fowler Jr. going to Atlanta and Corey Littleton going to the Raiders. They also lost infamous cornerback Nikhil Roby-Coleman to Philadelphia, the dude who got away with that horrible pass interference call against the Saints 2 years ago. Yeah, that dude. But the most notable loss has to be Todd Gurley. And they also lost Greg Zuerlein, the leg, a.k.a. Legatron. He's been a great player for them for a couple of years. He will no longer be on the team. Almost every move that the Rams have made so far this offseason has been at the line of scrimmage. They re-signed offensive lineman Andrew Whitworth, and they gave Austin Blythe a 1-year deal. They signed edge rusher Leonard Floyd and defensive tackle Sean Robinson. Then after a deal fell through with the Ravens, defensive tackle Michael Brockers re-signed for another 3 years with the Rams. So they get their big defensive tackle playing alongside Aaron Donald. You look at the Rams draft, they had no first-round pick because of the Jalen Ramsey trade, but they had a pair of picks in the second and the third round. So 4 picks total in the second and the third. At 52 overall, they took the 4th running back off the board, Cam Akers from Florida State. He should be a great fit running that zone scheme of the Rams. 5 picks later, sorry guys, they took the 12th wide receiver, Van Jefferson from Florida. Denzel Mims went 2 picks later and make it a nice baker's dozen of wide receivers in the first 2 rounds, which I think was a record. 13 wide receivers in the first 64 picks is pretty ridiculous. But Jefferson should also be a good fit. I don't see him making all that much of an impact this year, but maybe over the next year or two, as possibly they lose Robert Woods or, depending on if Josh Reynolds can take that step and take on the load of that wide receiver 3 spot, we'll have to wait and see. But I'm not crazy about Van Jefferson this year. Maybe next year he can be more of a productive player. Then with their first pick in the 3rd round, they took an edge rusher from Alabama, Terrell Lewis, who had a first-round grade by a lot of scouts. He had 2 significant injuries in college, which made him fall, but he is still a major talent. It will be fun to see if the new defensive coordinator there in LA, Brandon Staley, can draw out that talent from Terrell Lewis. He's got big shoes to fill with Wade Phillips getting that defense to the Super Bowl 2 years ago. Staley coached linebackers for John Fox and Vic Fangio in Chicago and Denver, so he's been around some elite outside linebackers for sure. They made another 6 picks after those first 4. 3 more defensive players, a guard, a kicker, and another tight end, Bryson Hopkins from Purdue. This dude is a great receiver, but can't block worth a lick. So maybe the Rams offense really will be moving to more of a 12 personnel, and maybe they'll be more centered on the tight ends with Gerald Everett and Tyler Higbee, and now this kid, Bryson Hopkins. The Rams' key schedule run, you got after the bye, Week 10 versus the Seahawks. Week 11, they're at the Buccaneers. Week 12, they're at home against the 49ers. Week 13, they're at the Cardinals. Week 14 versus the Patriots. So, again, another 3 division games with 2 East Coast teams. We'll see how the Rams can fare in 2020. Last team here in the NFC West. We got the Arizona Cardinals at 5-10-1 last year. They were 1-5 in the division. The Cardinals started 2019 with a new coach in Cliff Kingsbury and their first overall pick from 2018 at quarterback, Kyler Murray. Kingsbury comes from Texas Tech, where he coached Case Keenum, Johnny Manziel, Baker Mayfield, and of course, the one and only Mr. Patrick Mahomes. He definitely knows how to get the best out of his QBs. He finished his 6-year career at Texas Tech with a 35-40 record, 19-35 in the conference, which is not all that great from a guy making the transition into pros, but it was the coaching of his quarterbacks that spoke for itself. I know Keenum is not really a starting NFL quarterback by any stretch of the imagination, and Johnny Football was a joke, but Mahomes and Mayfield love Kingsbury. They spoke very highly of him when they were asked about it 2 years ago, or last year, or before last year when Kingsbury got the hire. He inherited Josh Rosen, a 10th overall pick in 2018, but after a year in the NFL, the Cardinals realized they missed, and that was not going to be the guy to lead them going forward. Especially he wasn't the guy that can run Kingsbury's offense. So, plus, I don't think there was a chance in hell Kingsbury was going to let the Cardinals pass on Kyler Murray, no matter how good of a season Josh Rosen had. So, Kingsbury recruited Murray for 2 years while he was in high school. They kept a close relationship while Murray was playing with the rival Texas A&M, and then when he transferred to another rival in Oklahoma, Kingsbury has wanted Murray for years, and after 1 year with a terrible roster around him, Murray finished as the number 7 quarterback in fantasy, which is ridiculous to think about because that team really was a dumpster fire before he got there. Obviously, his rushing is a massive plus. 26% of his fantasy points came from his rushing, but he answered probably the biggest question coming into the league for him, which was, can he play an entire season? Will he withstand the hits of an NFL season? And can that mobility transfer into the NFL? He played all 16 games, and he was able to take 48 sacks, tied for the most in the league, and he ran the ball 93 times. So he took plenty of hits, or at least he was smart enough to avoid a lot of hits. The Cardinals' offense was historically bad in 2018 before Cliff and Kyler got there, but they finished as the number 17 scoring offense last year. Not too shabby to go from dead last to middle of the pack when really the only change to the offense was that quarterback. This year is a little different, however. The biggest non-quarterback move of the offseason was definitely Arizona acquiring DeAndre Hopkins and a 4th-round pick, don't forget about that, from the Texans for David Johnson and a 2020 second-round pick plus a 2021 4th-round pick. Adding a player like DeAndre Hopkins is always a great thing, but to also get out of David Johnson's contract and essentially only give up a 2nd-round pick to do it, I think Arizona made out like bandits. And they now have a legit set of wide receivers with D-Hop as the alpha dog, number 1 guy, Hall of Famer Larry Fitzgerald in the slot, who they re-signed to a 1-year, $11 million deal in the offseason, and the young promising outside threat, Christian Kirk, who finished as number 40 in half PPR in only 13 games. If he had played the other 3 games and scored his, I think it was like 10.3 points per game, he actually would have finished right between 24 and 25. So I think if this dude can stay healthy with the guys around him, he should be just fine. The Cardinals made a midseason trade for Kenyon Drake, and he immediately made an impact. In his first game with the Cardinals, he got 15 carries and caught 4 balls, 162 total yards, and a touchdown against the division rival San Francisco 49ers with their top 5 running defense. He was right there with Derrick Henry for fantasy MVP during the playoffs. In weeks 15 and 16, he had 330 total yards with 4 catches and 6 touchdowns. Sounds like an MVP to me. 6 touchdowns. Can't beat that. The Cardinals' offseason began with putting that transition tag on Kenyon Drake, kind of solidifying him as the number 1 running back coming into this season. They also re-signed offensive lineman Marcus Gilbert and Max Garcia. Like many teams, they used free agency to try and rebuild their horrible defensive line and just defense as a whole. They brought in defensive tackles Jordan Phillips and Trayvon Cooley. They signed 2 linebackers, Devondre Campbell and Devin Kennard. So the defense should be better than it was last year, especially when you add in the dude that they got in the beginning of the draft, Isaiah Simmons. He goes with the 8th overall pick. He could join Derwin James and Jamal Adams as the tight end erasers, as I like to call them, which is exactly what the Cardinals need after their historically bad season against defending tight ends. In our Anytime Touchdown Scoring Parlay episode, which is coming up in a couple weeks, we'll get into just how amazingly bad the Cardinals were at defending tight ends in 2019. In the 3rd round, they took a tackle from Houston, Josh Jones. Then 2 defensive linemen in the 4th, and in the 4th round, they got 2 defensive linemen. Sorry, they had 2 picks in the 4th. And then linebacker in the 6th round and a flyer at running back in the 7th. So their key schedule run week 15 versus the Eagles, week 16 they're versus the 49ers, and then week 17 they're at the Rams. Their schedule is not too bad. That's what happens when you finish last in your division. So this division is a lot of fun. It's always competitive. Always great games that you see, at the 4:25 time slot for me out here in the East Coast. So that's going to do it for the NFC West offseason recap 2020 season preview. Make sure you check us out next week when we do the NFC North. It'll be the last of our division previews. And then we'll get into we'll start breaking down the stuff for this year's fantasy, some previewing, positional previews and the draft strategy stuff. So we'll get into all that. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure you check us out next week. And as always, may the fantasy gods be cruel to your opponents.
You have been listening to the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. For more great episodes and information, follow us on social media and tune in every week. Kickin or Stickin is available on Google Podcasts, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Alexa, Reach.tv, or your favorite podcast service. Kickin or Stickin is a proud member of the HC Universal Network family of podcasts. To find out more about this and other great shows on our network, visit us online at hcuniversalnetwork.com today. Fantasy football is fun, but gambling addiction destroys lives. If you or someone you love suffers from gambling addiction, please do not be afraid to seek help. The National Council on Problem Gambling operates the National Problem Gambling Helpline Network. Contact them today at 1-800-522-4700. Thank you for tuning in to the Kickin or Stickin Fantasy Football Podcast. Please remember to play responsibly and always look for your man downfield.
Well, the world's gone mad if you ask me. Every dog and his mother heading for the park or the beach, forgetting about the home and all it's done for us recently. No fur off my back. The AA helps me there, looking after house and contents, freeing me up to work on my swimming stroke. That doggy paddle isn't as easy as it looks, you know.
For added peace of mind, when you're working from home, the AA provides cover for home office equipment. And right now you can get €60 off your home insurance when you purchase online at the AA.ie. Who's got clever home insurance? Minimum premium of €218 applies. €60 off online. New business policies only. Acceptance criteria, terms and conditions apply. AA Ireland Limited Trading as AA Insurance is regulated by the Central Bank of Ireland.
Using your smart speaker for this? Okay, I've added cheese to your shopping list. Yeah, that's pretty smart. But shopping online with SuperValue? That's even smarter. Have the best produce, hand-picked and delivered straight to your door. Download the SuperValue app now or shop online at supervalue.ie.